Hello, this is Stephen Hour, and yes, we are back with another top 10 episode, top 10 video. Today, I'll be doing my top 10 villains from TV. Now, last time we did my top 10 anti-heroes, or you get the idea? This time, it's villains. So these are people that are really meant to antagonize. There's nothing really moral, like, these are the villains we're not really rooting for. Well, we are, but what we're rooting for are their downfall. Now, keep in mind, this is personal opinion. All genres are being taken into account, and these are just villains I enjoy seeing, mostly because I want them to be seen taken down. So, before we get into the top 10, let's kick off with an honorable mention. I want to kick off the list with an honorable mention of Hiram Lodge from Riverdale. Now, the show Riverdale is basically a sort of kind of modern uptake on the classic Archie characters from the Archie comics. In the show, Hiram Lodge is also drastically different. He's still a rich father to Veronica, but he's more updated to be a more ruthless, I guess, basically mob boss, who is constantly antagonizing the citizens of Riverdale, and really appeared in Season 2. Even though it's clear that he does love and care for Veronica, his need and lust for power and wealth will always, be first, and his family kind of second. For his desire to be, not to be where he came from, this poor man and local resident, he wants to be essentially better than his father. He knew his father's always loved him, but his lust for power and wealth kind of essentially turned him into a monster. Sometimes nicknamed the Man in Black, which was only really for one episode. He comes up with schemes to essentially gain power and wealth within Riverdale. Now, I like the idea of turning this classic wealthy man, who's essentially he looks drastically different from his comic book counterpart, but sometimes having a drastically different interpretation of your comic book counterpart can work, and I think this is one of the best exceptions to the rule where it actually worked. I like how there are episodes we showed that he's human, but his lust for power, wealth, and essentially to be, essentially top dog will always take over. The instinct of not survival, but just to be like the most number one villain, villain or the big guy will always take over. But this villain is shown to be compassionate at times, which kind of can turn him into an anti-hero, but then there are moments where the loving compassion is gone for this more ruthless, villainous, vile monster. So that's why he's kind of an honorable mention, as he's not a real proper villain or antagonist. And that's why he's an honorable mention. With that out of the way, let's get into the top 10. Kicking off our top 10 is Katrina Pierce from The Vampire Diaries. She's the doppelganger to Eleanor throughout essentially most of the series. Katrina is basically a vampire who always pops up when you least expect, and essentially does whatever she wants. She has a few humanity moments, but she's basically a vampire who's really there to survive. She's also quite the femme fatale character, a reoccurring villain, and basically comes to just cause trouble, not just cause trouble really for the Salvatore brothers, who are also vampires, and she played a role in turning them into vampires. I like how she's only in it for herself and her self-interests first, and I also like, because she's such a survivalist, she's made quite a lot of enemies along the way. With many vampires, especially the originals, a group of the first ever generation of vampires, really after her. The actress, how she could play multiple doppelgangers, this is perhaps my favorite portrayal, or her favorite doppelganger, as every time she pops up, we don't really know what she's really after. She may appear she wants to help, but she's really in it for her own self-interests. And I like that sort of femme fatale they went with this character, and that's still arguably why I really like this character, because we are not entirely sure whose side she's on, or what her real end game is. It's always a bit of a mystery, and that is what I love about this character. Nothing changed, we never know, her end game. And that's always been one of my favorite things about drawing with this character. How she's always coming back. And really just, it's nice to have just a more enigma kind of femme fatale character, which I like. Number 9. Number 9 goes to Gerard Argent from Teen Wolf. You can definitely tell with maybe my ladders, I'm more leaning towards the teen drama aspect, but honestly, it's probably because I'm more kind of familiar would be a better term with these characters than I am with the more, well-known TV villains. Gerard Agent is basically a member of the Urgent family, the senior patriarch in many ways, and he is also a hunter, like a hunter. And basically, they are basically people that go hunting down werewolves and any other supernatural creatures. But what makes him different is others normally live by a code of honor, some ethics, rules they will not break. Gerard doesn't. At first, when we see him in Season 2, it's almost like he's going out to get revenge for the death of his daughter, blaming it on all these hunters. And his son is not willing to go along with it because there are rules they follow. They don't go killing werewolves unless they themselves have spilled blood. If there's evidence that they spilled blood, then they're fair game. But if they're not, they have to be left alone. But they're essentially to make sure that they don't go out committing, violent acts. And most werewolves stick to that code. Stick to that rules as well. Gerard at first seems to be want revenge, but it's all a smokescreen for him to essentially gain power through this in the supernatural in order to save his own mortality, because he is an old and dying man. Every time he comes back up, you know that he's just really in it for himself, kind of like Kathleen. But what makes, I think, Gerard different from number 10 is that really he's a master manipulator. I've never thought we'd get that's something that was never with Katrina Pierce. But with Gerard, he's a master manipulator. Hell, in Season 6, he manipulates literally an entire town to go and essentially go out, essentially killing a bunch of werewolves and other supernatural creatures. Half of them who are kids. He's manipulating people to go and kill kids. And I like how, again, he's always in it for himself. And his ending feels very poetic. I would say that. Yeah, like I said, maybe these latter two you wouldn't think as big TV villains, but I do, and I enjoy seeing them pop up, knowing that they're going to get their comeuppance, especially with number 9. Number 8. Number 8 goes to the Mayor from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Now, Buffy the Vampire Slayer has given us some very memorable villains, with Angelic, essentially Angel's doppelganger, Angelic, Glory, Miles Warren. But for me, the Mayor, is the best villain. Basically, he's this long sentry demon who basically has this ritual every few years to essentially go and consume a whole bunch of people. He's essentially an immortal. I love about him is first off, he is the Mayor. He's the leading figure in Sunnydale. And he's essentially is to prolong his life. He essentially wants to cause this massive destruction, and he has an army of vampires and at one point a Slayer working for him. And that being Faith. I love how he's just funny. There's just something about the performance here that makes you feel, even though he's villainous, there's something that comes off him and just being a jolly, just fun villain, which is oddly enough in a sentence by itself. I also like how he tells especially Buffy and Angel that the relationship won't work, not because he's gonna kill them, but because, come on, you're an immortal. She isn't. She is going to grow old and die. You won't, unless you stay in the sun or whatever. Time is going to catch up with her. You won't. He's had an experience like that, and I like that little line. I also like how even he's, believes, and he's kind of colorful, as he believes in not just order, but also just, the next generation, having to prepare them. But he also wants to prepare them with some old ways, which is kind of weird, but makes sense with his character. There's just something about him that's just so funny, and I think that goes down to this performance here. Now, people will, of course, will like other villains and say, well, they're the better, like Miles Warren, who's arguably the most despicable, despite him being literally a human, and Glory being a god. This being a sort of centuries demon, really long forgotten. I don't know, just something about him, I say he's probably the best villain the show ever had. Main villain. And I think that just goes down to the performance. Number 7. Number 7 goes to Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin from Daredevil. Honestly, this is just Honestly, this is a very unique interpretation of one of the most beloved Marvel comic book villains. The Kingpin, in the comics, is a notorious crime lord who is infamous and has had run-ins with Spider-Man and Daredevil, respectively. In the show Daredevil, which was a Netflix Marvel collaborated show, which was to take place within the MCU before, now Disney buying all the rights to Marvel, so that no longer happens. But in the show, Wilson Fisk was essentially a notorious criminal who was running a sort of underground, crime network with the ambitions in season 1 to rebuild Hell's Kitchen in his own image and presents himself as a respectable businessman. But he never took the alias of the Kingpin. He also happens to have this love for a woman named Vanessa, an arts gallery woman. Eventually, the two hit off, and she eventually finds more about him and more than supports his criminal endeavors. And the character here is the most layered and complex villain in Daredevil. He eventually comes back in season 3 after spending season 2 in prison, where he rebuilds himself, during his time in prison, and becomes the essentially big criminal within the joint. In season 3, he's rebuilding he builds himself a criminal empire, takes the name Kingpin, wears the white clothing, and essentially wants to take down the man who took Daredevil, the man who took him down. Honestly, one of the best villains to grace Netflix, but this is just a really transformative version of the character. When I thought of Kingpin, I thought from the 90s Spider-Man cartoon and even the live-action Daredevil movie, even though it wasn't good. For me, it was still a very accurate representation of the Kingpin. Wilson Fisk here is a completely different incarnation, a completely different, almost character for him. But just as Daredevil was slowly becoming more like the comic book character, the same was with the Kingpin. And it is just a phenomenal transition with how the creators managed to do that so well is astounding to me. And it was a shame that it was cut with season 3. If the 4th season, I would have imagined this guy coming back in some capacity, maybe more with his story to tell. But I just loved it the best, and I just wish he could have come back. But he didn't. Number 6. Number 6 is Prometheus. Prometheus is often hailed as the greatest villain on Arrow, and I think so. Prometheus is really a Batman villain. Basically, in the comic book origin, his parents were gunned down roughly the same way Batman's was, but his parents were criminals. But when they were gunned down, he vowed his life to get revenge on the criminal element that took, not criminal element, but the police that took that took their lives. And because of that, he became a thorn in Batman's side and even the Justice League for many years. Prometheus in the show is drastically different. He's, first off, a drastically different version of the costume. And the costume is a throwback to what Oliver Queen kind of wore in season 1. It's more black, it has that sort of feel. But at the same time, I just like the mask of it. He's literally a complete psychopath. And his real name, and the name he went under was Adrian Chase, and his whole plan was to destroy Oliver, but he was the first villain on the show to break him. He really just kind of founded a game. He's a real psychopath that was one of the few to actually get in Oliver's head. The clothing is just so phenomenal, and I like how at first we think he's one of the good guys. Not Prometheus, Adrian Chase, one of the good guys. When we find out he's been this guy this whole time, swept under the rug. I also like how Prometheus is also a term for Oliver to come to the realization that time has kind of caught up with him. Him being the Hood in the first few seasons, how it says his actions will have consequences. Well, his actions resulted in the creation of this psychopath who now wants to take him down. Which I find very interesting that they would go with that route. He wants revenge for the death of his father, kind of thing. I find that really interesting. All of his actions caused the creation of this villain. It's been done so many times in media, but I think it's one of the few times it actually worked. Number 5. Number 5 goes to Eobard Thawne, aka the Reverse Flash from The Flash. Probably the Flash's most notorious arch-nemesis in the Rogues Gallery. Eobard Thawne is essentially a man from the 24th century, a century way beyond the 21st. He was and is basically obsessed with the Flash, wanting to essentially kill him. He delights in that he's caused him so much pain. He's literally the complete opposite of the Flash. I like how in the first few series he started off originally as a sort of mentor figure and also kind of taught him to be who he is. And there was a genuine kind of friendship there until it's revealed that he caused a lot of this, all this pain, his powers and all that. And essentially, he just hates him with a burning passion. I like how there's really no real rhyme or reason or a question to what caused the Reverse Flash to hate the Flash that much. Because he's from the future, there's a bit of uncertainty. I like how he's always coming back to cause trouble for the Flash, and that is really the Reverse Flash's MO. He's always coming back to cause trouble for the Flash, which is always fun in my opinion. A villain should always be like that. He was really the primary antagonist of Season 1, but then after that, he could have easily gone down the Malcolm Merlyn route with every time he came back he was not a good character. But instead it was done the complete opposite. Every time he came back we knew something great was about to happen. Rather than Malcolm Merlyn, what was on Arrow, was kind of just boring after a while. This was completely different. The Flash, the Reverse Flash, is really the Flash's arch nemesis, and I say one of the best villains on that show. Even when he went to another show, Legends of Tomorrow, where he was really the primary antagonist in Season 2, along with Malcolm Merlyn, Damien Darhk, to form essentially the Legion of Doom, he was still a very solid antagonist, and really caused a lot of problems for the Legends. He's a really interesting character there. Fun character to always see pop up, knowing that, you know, maybe we're going to find more about his origin, and one day he's going to get the comeuppance he deserves. Number 4. Number 4 goes to, is a tie between the Master and Mistress, aka Missy, from Doctor Who. Now, now, let me just get you some background. The Master is like the Doctor, a Time Lord, a person who has the ability to, as he's on the verge of death, regenerate into a different body. To a different person, almost have like a different appearance and a different personality. And because of that, we don't really know when he's going to pop up and who he's going to look like. My introduction to the character was during the David Tennant era with that Master's version, aka Harold Saxon, basically Britain's Prime Minister, and literally a complete sociopath. He's a complete whack job, with cartoonish at times, but a complete whack job, just something completely off his rocker. Even though he was even though it was a bit more comedic, a little bit comedic, not too comedic, but a little bit in the earlier series, the early times he appeared. By the time he appeared, roughly at the end of the Tennant era, it was more something a bit scary. But by the time he reappeared during Capaldi's last few episodes, he was really completely off the deep end. Oh, less off the deep end, but was more kind of normal, but there was still something about that was completely unhinged behind the eyes. And that's what I loved about it, especially since it was the first time ever this version of the Master teamed up, well, any Master teamed up with the current incarnation, which for this was Mistress, aka Missy, the first ever female incarnation of the Master. What I like about it is how the two played off, and Missy here was kind of started off as pretty much the main villain for Capaldi's first series, but when she appeared in a few episodes in the next few seasons, she was becoming more of an anti-hero, and really developed a very strong bond and connection with this incarnation of Peter Capaldi. What I think of the Master, it is these two incarnations that pop to mind. They're really there to really cause troubles for the Doctor and humanity, because the Doctors form such a huge bond with, you know, the Earth. They find that this is a way just to, you know, not annoy them, but just really to cause fun in their mind. When the two teamed up, it was absolutely phenomenal, but of course, their plan kind of backfired, forcing the two having to reluctantly team up with the Doctor in order to save their own hides. But I like how really the Howard Saxon version, you know, the Master, was really more begrudgingly. Missy was really there because there was a genuine friendship you kind of felt, and again, the two really bounced off. There was such good chemistry between these two incarnations when they turned up. And when it comes to Doctor Who villains as a whole, it is the Master, Master and Missy always being my favourite villains to constantly pop up every now and again. Whereas the Daleks got overused, and the Cybermen really can be good in some episodes and have proven so. I feel they've become more henchman type figures and have lost their, I guess, coolness of, you know, popping up every now and again. But the Master and Missy are such good combinations, and I thought give them both the spot, as they are literally the same person. Number 3. Number 3 goes to Kilgrave from Jessica Jones. Arguably my favorite villain from Marvel's Netflix whole series, played by the always phenomenal David Tennant. Kilgrave is based on the comic book character of the Purple Man, which you can see during the show as some of his clothing do resemble him wear purple, though of course he doesn't have purple skin like the comic. In the show, he basically has the ability for mind control, but after having a sad origin story of essentially being abandoned as a kid, he really, and because of this power also came with the curse, as he couldn't really form any real connection because people, again, he could control people, couldn't form any real connection with anyone, which is a real shame. As a result of this, the character sort of became sort of ego with no conscience, no morals, no empathy. And even though that has a kind of a little bit of likable quality, but can also be a monster, as he's also a kind of abuser, a rapist, and has an unhealthy fixation on Jessica Jones, who he's kind of raped. And his obsession with him literally drives him. I like how just how he's this smart, there's something about Tennant that could play this bad guy just so scarily, but also likable. There's an unhealthy obsession, creepiness behind those eyes. And I also love the costume. How, again, his costume has a bit of purple, or a very light pink, but it still feels modern, but also pays a lot of tribute to the comic book character's backstory. Again, I absolutely love Kilgrave. He's an absolutely fun villain. He's always in my top 3 of villains overall in any form of media, and I think this is probably the reason why. And I think David Tennant just sells this performance in any performance he'll ever do. This is my favorite performance, probably my second favorite performance of David Tennant's entire career, my first one being the 10th Doctor. But just the fact he could flip from being that character to this is just outstanding. Number 2. Gus Fring from Breaking Bad. Really, he is essentially a notorious, essentially a gangster, a notorious drug kingpin who runs a chain of fast food restaurants and distributes drugs. He is well respected and well known within the community, and both antagonizes and can sometimes be friends with our character Walter White within the series. There's just something about him that just something you just want to get his comeuppance. Out of everyone on this list, he's the one villain I think everyone wants him to finally, we want to see his downfall out of everyone on this list. And it's so satisfying. The performance here is really phenomenal. Again, Breaking Bad has such a notorious reputation of having some of the greatest, have the greatest anti-hero and one of the greatest TV villains. And I think this is the best example of why people still say about it to this day. He is just a fantastic villain here, with arguably one of the best villain deaths you can ever get on television. I love it to the max, and I would continue to love this villain. And it's just phenomenal how he could just, how he's always calm all the time. He rarely loses his temper. In fact, I don't think he ever really lost his temper. But just something about, just him, knowing that when he enters a room, he's holding all the cards. He's grabbing the room, the attention, not just within the room, but also the viewers watching at home. There's just something about how this character is not just being written, but performed that just grabs your attention. And I fucking love it. But with that, there must be a number 1. So my number 1 favorite TV villain is the Cardinal from The Musketeers, portrayed by Peter Capaldi, who of course was my favorite 10th Doctor. This is my first experience with Capaldi as an actor. I remember him in this series. Basically, he's the Cardinal, in those times, he would have been kind of a pope. He's the Cardinal, with France, with King Louis XVI, and causes trouble for the Musketeers. Really obsessed with carving power and wealth. But there's just something about him that, how he gives off the appearance of really being something that the king should have by his side. Someone, the king should trust. There's something about that is so, I can't even explain it in words. It is that fucking awesome. It's just something about him that you just know, that you just want to get his comeuppance. And he does get away in a comeuppance. I really wished that he could have continued to be an antagonist throughout the rest of the series post the first season, but sadly, Peter Capaldi dropped out of the series when he got the role to play the Doctor, and of course, that being his childhood, hero, role model, the opportunity to play his hero, he dropped out to do that, and I think it was a good choice overall. But I think the Cardinal was part of the reason why the show was so good. Armin Raphael, again, I'm butchering that name, but just, so good performance. Fantastic performance here. Just the way he says his lines, the way he commands the room, and the way he tries to play off as being someone the king could have, and he says what he does for the Hope of France, but it's also at the part-time, it's also for himself. And the fact that he kind of goes on that road from being in it for himself, but in it for the benefit of France, you don't really know, what he really wants to do to really help, whether it be for him or France. His loyalties kind of get divided or even blurred sometimes. And I absolutely love him, and I think this role could not work with anyone else except for Peter Capaldi, and that's why the Cardinal is my favorite TV villain. And there we have it. Those were my top 10 TV villains. Do you agree with this list? Which other villains did I miss out? Of course, TV has, of course, given us so many memorable TV villains. I would have left out some very popular favorites. So please write your opinions down in the comments. And until next time, this has been the Steven Hour. And ladies and gentlemen, so long for now.